I'm Vincent Verweij. I'm with the Arlington County Forestry Office, and we're here at the beautiful Bon Air Park in the Sunny Garden over here. It's a balmy 90 degrees out today, so I'm really appreciating the shade of this willow oak behind us. We're going to take a look at different trees, see how we can identify trees, and I'm going to talk a little bit about Arlington County's forestry programs and how you can get involved. During a day like this, it's obvious why trees matter to us. The shade that they provide and the cooling they provide to our city and our county are really critical to making our place to live a lot more comfortable. Places without trees and without shade tend to be visited a lot less. It even has an impact on how much people go to shops and how much income shops get from that. But when you're in a park like this, it's so obvious where people like to hang out. You see a lot of people hanging out under shade with their picnic blankets. The only exceptions might be those people who are trying to catch some rays, but I'm sure once they're done with that, they usually move to trees' shade. Another really big benefit that we focus on is the ecosystem benefits that our trees provide to our wildlife. We focus a lot on native species, like this redbud over here, and we try to prioritize the planting and preservation of native species on our own properties, in parks, and on other properties owned by the Transportation Bureau. And we work with private development projects to prioritize native plants as well. These native trees and also non-native trees also have other benefits, such as reduction of stormwater, both the quantity of stormwater, so reducing flooding in large areas, and reducing the incidence of water pollution through filtration. Along with that, they store carbon, they filter pollution, and people benefit in so many ways from trees. They're kind of a jack of all trades, if you must, and they just make our life so much more beautiful and so much more whole. This is why we manage our trees and we care so much about trees in the county. I spoke a little bit about the benefits of trees, and one of the things that we're looking a lot at these days is how they benefit the reduction of stormwater and flooding. Well, this is an area where we've addressed it kind of in the opposite way. This area flooded a lot, and we started realizing that people were hanging out in here on picnic benches and all this stuff, enjoying the park, of course, but we were losing a lot of picnic benches in the stream, and we were starting to see this floodplain degrade. So what we did is, you can see small saplings throughout here, and we're going to take a closer look at these, and we're going to look at how to identify some of these trees too. But what we're doing here is taking the use from a little bit more active to a little bit more passive and turning this back into a forest. So what's going to happen here is this will grow up and hopefully reduce some of the stormwater farther downstream. So if we get another big flood, at least that will reduce it by the amount that this area can take up. We're looking to expand this in areas near streams. 4 Mile Run is right there. So we are looking for places in our parks where I know space is always being competed over what kind of use we might get, but we are looking for spaces to improve in this way and to really get a benefit for everyone. Of course, people can still go through here. This is just a fence to show that people should stop mowing here for a while, and they can still enjoy all the wildlife and enjoy the trees and get close to the stream over there. It's just something where we've taken use and changed it around to a forested use. I'm really excited to show you some of the trees in here. So identifying trees is a skill you kind of develop over time. You're not going to be able to learn it from one video, but I'm going to try to show you what to look for, at least when you're looking at identifying trees. We've got 150 native species of trees in this area, so it takes some time to get used to all of that diversity. But I have some simple tricks that at least get you down to some idea of what the tree might be, so you can dig a little bit further, look at some field guides, and look online on some tree nerd websites and figure it out. So I'm going to start out over here with one of the trees that's actually becoming a little bit rarer. This is one of the ash trees. So I'm going to take this off because I'm allowed to. This is one leaf. So one thing this is called a composite leaf. So it's made out of different leaflets. And you can identify the difference between that and another leaf that has multiple leaves is that there's only one bud at the base of the leaf. So what defines a leaf is basically everything that comes out of one bud. So this tree is also known to be opposite, and that's an arrangement of the leaves. So these leaves come out of one point and come out on the left side and on the right side at the same point. So that's a good way to limit your identification already, because there are only a handful of genuses or species of trees that are opposite. We often call them the madcap horse. It's maple ash dogwood, Caprifoliaceae, which is the honeysuckle family, and the horse chestnuts. There are a couple more, but those are really the common ones. You'll see dogwoods everywhere in Arlington County. It's actually the most common tree. We might see it through here, but I don't think it was planted, so maybe we'll see one. So figuring out what arrangement the leaf is, and you can figure this out in the winter too, because you can see where the buds end up, is one of the greatest ways to start with tree identification. So we're going to go take a look at some other trees to see if we can find one with alternate arrangement. So this is opposite arrangement. We're going to see something else. Let's see. So a really common streamside species is the black willow. Extremely great wildlife benefit tree, and it is alternate. When we zoom in on this area, you can see that the leaf comes out of one side and then the next leaf comes out of the other side. So it's alternating as opposed to the leaf coming out of the same place. So you've already differentiated between two large groups of trees. Then you've already cut out half of the species that something could be if you figured out whether it's alternate or opposite. There's also one other arrangement called whorled, which means that it's going around the stem. That's pretty rare. Those are things like princess tree, but you'll probably figure that out when you actually look at it, because those trees are very unusual looking, so it's going to be hard to mistake those. This is another way to identify trees, is whether they're evergreen or not. And this might seem obvious to some people, but there are some exceptions to that as well. Of course, there's exceptions to almost any rule. Just like I said, dogwoods are usually opposite. Well, guess what? There's an alternate leaf dogwood. Luckily, it's named the alternate leaf dogwood, so it's usually easy to figure out. So this is a holly, which you might be familiar with from Christmas time, or anytime you're looking around in winter, you see the red berries. You can really see this tree pop. This is an evergreen tree, which means it has leaves throughout the year. That doesn't mean it doesn't lose its leaves, but it only loses them when it feels like the leaves are not producing enough sugar or energy for the tree. So you'll actually see these leaves stay on the tree for basically forever until the tree dies. And that's a really good way to differentiate trees too. So you have evergreen and deciduous trees, and you have opposite and alternate trees. And they exist in both spaces. So you can have an alternate evergreen, or an opposite evergreen, or an alternate deciduous tree, or an opposite deciduous tree. But that's another breakdown. So now you have 4 different things to work with, and you can narrow it down even more. Of course, figuring out whether something is evergreen in the middle of the summer might be tough, but that's actually what makes it easier to figure out in the winter. So if you're ever interested, I do have a long presentation. It's about a 3-hour presentation on winter tree ID, and it'll go through every single tree in this area and how to identify them. Okay. I spoke about composite leaves and simple leaves, or just single leaves earlier with the ash I was showing. This is a good example of a tree that is opposite, so where the leaves come out of the same area, and with a simple leaf that has some teeth on it. You might recognize this leaf from the Canadian flag, or you might have seen this tree around your neighborhood. This is a red maple, really good to, really fairly easy to identify by the fact that there's always something red on it. Around this time of year, you have the red stems on the leaves, and earlier in the year it has red flowers, it has red fall color, and usually has red twigs when they're young too, so you can see that over here as well. It is fairly easily confusable with sugar maple and Norway maple, but once you get a good eye of those, you can usually figure out what it is. This area is one of the only areas where we have native grown red maples. So we're in a floodplain here, the floodplain of 4 Mile Run, and this is a great place for red maples to thrive. They really love wet areas that occasionally get inundated. They can handle disturbance very well. They tend to internalize decay in their bark or in their trunk, so they can handle some damage and just grow over it. Unfortunately, that leads to that decay to still being in those trees, and sometimes we see those trees drop branches like we see over here on the ground. But fantastic wildlife tree, really great for floodplains, and it's also planted quite a bit in street tree pits because it's so resistant to damage, and street tree pits are often damaged. It can handle the urban environment quite well. One other way to identify trees is not by their leaves, and aside from their bark, is how the tree is shaped, the structure or the form. So when I'm looking in this area, we are seeing some older trees, and the red maple over there that I'm looking at, it's got kind of a vase-shaped form. Sometimes these trees, like you see in the back over there, start creating multiple trunks even lower up. That can be a real identifying feature. Some trees like oaks or sycamores don't necessarily do that as much. They can do that, and you do see it in the wild, but this is much more common with species like red maple or black willow. They'll have these bunched trunks, and sometimes even they'll take 10 feet and then they'll have a bunched trunk, and that can be a really good identifying feature. American elms, another floodplain species, is also something that really comes out like a vase almost, and sometimes even at the base. You'll see those on the National Mall and around the Jefferson Basin too. If you look to this side, you see a black tupelo, which has a very different form, very straight at the bottom, then comes out almost 90 degrees with its branches, and then starts to branch out a little bit at an angle over top. This one's a really typical form, except that it's missing what I describe as like a giant sitting on the top. And what's funny is there's actually an example of that over there. The smaller tree in the back there, it looks like somebody sat on the top. It's perfectly healthy. It's just kind of, that's how it grows. It grows straight, then it has these straight branches, then these angled branches, and then at the top there's kind of like a flop going on. It's a very strong tree and a really good wildlife species. I really love it, but it's got this kind of characteristic thing going on when it's younger. You'll see it a little bit later in life too. Some of the top branches can be kind of angled. So those are some examples of how you can use form to identify a tree. I didn't walk close to that tree. I already knew what it looked like because I've seen hundreds of these species of this particular species before, so I've gotten kind of an image for it. And that's not to show off that, oh, I'm so great at tree identification. It's to show that it takes repetition. It takes teaching yourself and looking at trees in different places to really understand what their form is and how to identify them. Now, the other thing, I've talked about the floodplain a lot over here. This is another way to identify species, is what habitat do they live in. When they're planted, that can be a little bit difficult, but when you're in a natural environment like this, you can really exclude a lot of species that would not occur in the floodplain. You're not going to get a lot of these dry species like a lot of the red oaks with some exceptions, things that prefer a ridge or a dry mountainside. You're going to get these species like red maple, black willow, sycamore, things like that that really love wet feet and can handle a little bit of damage too. So those are some of the ways to identify trees. I talked about leaves, their arrangement, what they look like, whether they're composite or simple. I talked about whether they're evergreen or not. I talked about the form of the trees, and then I also spoke about what habitat they live in. And those are going to be some really great tools to learn to identify trees. One of my favorite trees is the hickory, and this is a bitternut hickory over here. It's not particularly large for a hickory, but it is one of the most beautiful trees in this area. It gets this beautiful yellow color in the fall and just really love it. Historically, people have used the wood for all kinds of things that require really hard wood, hammer handles, things like that, that really need to hold on to a lot of force. But one of the greatest native trees we have, grows very slowly, and it does have the large hickory nuts, but also has a really great wildlife value. I showed you a smaller holly earlier, but this is one of the more mature hollies out there, and our native holly really gets quite big. This guy's probably maybe 14, 15 inches, and I say guy, but it's actually a girl. You can see the berries on there, and those are going to turn that bright red that I was talking about. One of our evergreen trees, I mentioned that it's often used for holidays, Christmas, things like that, and really fantastic evergreen for privacy, wildlife value, all kinds of things. I talked about the sycamore earlier in the floodplain. You can see this big beast over here, and even though it's a hot day right now, we had some cool wet weather earlier, and it's actually causing a little bit of an issue for the sycamore. You see some of the leaves are not looking so great. It's actually suffering a little bit from sycamore anthracnose, but it's coming back already. Most of the time these trees can handle it. They just suffer through it and then bring out a whole new flush of leaves. So you can already see the leaves coming back. It's a great floodplain species, really handles a lot of damage from flooding and things like that. So it's a very tough urban tree. One of the most common street trees in the world is actually a cross between the American sycamore over here and the eastern sycamore from Asia, called a London plane tree. And it's because they're so tough, they can handle root damage, and they can even handle disease and just spring back from that. So one of the most common species in Arlington County is the willow oak. It does extremely well, another native species. It's called a willow oak for a very obvious reason, that its leaves look like willow leaves and not like the typical leaf that you see on an oak with the lobes or the points. This is also a very common street tree species, and it could get gigantic. Look at this beast. It's probably almost 40 inches in diameter, and they do extremely well here. They're actually really adaptable. Street trees, floodplains, drier areas, they seem to just really love our area. If you drive along Clarendon Boulevard or Wilson Boulevard, you'll see them line most of the streets over there, and they do really well in an urban area. So this is one of our favorite trees. We try not to plant just one species, so as much as I love to have just this species because it does so well, but what if we get a big disease that wipes them all out? We would suddenly be without trees. So we try to break it up a little bit. We're back at the Sunny Garden, still at Bonaire Park. Come visit over here. It's a beautiful park. Even when it's 90 degrees out, you can find shade under the trees. I'm going to tell you really quick about some great ways to take care of trees on your property and how you can help out, either get involved or provide input to our planning efforts. So if you have trees on your yard or a place you have influence over, like a church or something like that, make sure to work with the trees, have them checked regularly by a certified arborist. And in these dry months that are coming up, like July and August, it's really great to water the trees. We've had some real issues where we've had a really wet early year, but then an extremely dry later year. So just get a hose and let it sit next to a tree and let the hose water the tree for about 30 minutes. It doesn't have to be on a high pressure, just enough to have that soak into the ground. That'll really help your mature and your young trees thrive throughout the hotter seasons. Other than that, make sure to clear your trees of English ivy, porcelain berry, these non-native vines that really impact our trees sometimes. And if you want to get involved with our planning effort, we are updating our urban forest master plan through the Forestry and Natural Resources Plan, and that will be going on from basically now until later in the next year. And you'll be seeing more in the press and through press releases from Arlington County on how to get involved.